Hello and welcome. This is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. Feedback is immensely important. Feel free to reach out to me. 2 ways to do this is through email and YouTube. Alright, so I'm on different audio platforms. It won't be hard to miss me. But, feel free to spread the word. The name of my podcast is The Harboring Light. Okay, so on to the topic of choice here. So I am going to give my perspective about the painting, The Kiss. Here we go. Alright, so the Kiss are also known as the Lovers. Alright, so here, what I think about it. So this painting was in itself created by Klimt, and the artist Gustav Klimt. Forgive me, he's Austrian. He was an Austrian painter there. Now, he wanted to represent the aspects of the blend between the union between the mystical and spiritual side of love, but some refer to it as the eroticism of love, with the romantic aspects of love, and then how that connects us to the earth of how our bond. That's supposed to be an allegory and a symbolism to that. I'll get into more of that, dab on that much later, towards the end. But anyhow, here's what I thought when I initially first saw it. So I was about, 19 or 20 or something like that, right? And when I saw this painting, I thought it was really unique because it reminded me of, I was already interested because I grew up, like I said, about the aspects of growing up in the 90s and the early 2000s, right? And so I remember when Subway, it used to be when you would go and sit down, and if you wanted to eat in a Subway, the way it was decorated, it was quite different. Now it's kind of like a health, I guess, remnant, the few times that I've been into a Subway now, remnant of a health bar or something like that, because it's supposed to be the symbol or the attitude of, oh, this is fresh food, so forth, right? So anyhow, my point being that it would have sketches or more like sketches, or I guess you could say maybe etchings, right, of people from the Victorian era, and newspaper articles and so forth, because I think that, and that's something that I'm going to get into more specifics, later on in another podcast when it comes to the overall image and the symbolism and all of that. Go rehash that again and talk about that from my point of view of companies and products, and what does that mean to consumers, and then what does that mean to culture in general. And I was about 5 or 6 at a time, and that kind of art form really drawed a lot of attention to me. I paid attention to it because I liked how there's a lot of skill in the aspects of making something seem like simplistic, but it's a lot of detailed skill and detailed work into it. And I like the grandiose details of in the attire. That I know that was something really interesting to me, to where ladies and men would dress in the Victorian era. As I got older, I read more about it and paid attention to it, and to the aspects of why they would wear the way, why, what it would mean as far as class structure and everything else. What is this all about? And so the Art Nouveau, this was really picking up leverage a lot of times when this particular artist, Gustav was in his era of painting, and particularly in this era when it was in the golden period. He was embracing the golden period, of his paintings, because if I'm not mistaken, it was reminiscent of, giving tribute, unfortunately, about the passing on of his family, very important family members, and their work that they did with the metal and with the aspects of that. And so it's a whole lot. It's also interesting with the aspects of the time period, because this was going on between 1907 and 1908. So that was right in the beginning of the 21st century, and right in the earlier periods, but that the Industrial Revolution was still, was kind of not so newish, because if I'm not mistaken, the Industrial Revolution started like in a, as early as the, really technically, I guess you can say, when, and it was just chicken and egg thing with using the tools to develop everything, when man could understand that the Bronze Age of metal and making hunting better and all these kind of things. So it's semantics with that. But anyhow, really when the Industrial Revolution was coming about, it was going on in the late 1800s here. So, that's the whole thing about the aspects and the dynamic of what's going on in that time period. And I'll get to that after I give my thought process about what I actually think about the painting. So I think that painting, it really stood out to me a lot because, I'm from me personally, when I started college, I was interested in art anyway, right? And so I didn't want to be this whole thing where, going to school for the sake of school or whatever kind of bullcrap. And I didn't want to go on the line of this aspects of struggling artists. And I was really looking for how do I merge technical skills, because I was interested in technology and art and all of these things. And so in my studies, when in my digital communication studies and all of that, merging all that together, when I found out about this painting, it really struck a chord with me because it was saying how is it important to understand the balance and the union between a man and a woman, and which is really something to see even more so when you find out about the reasons behind it, of how spiritual that can be. And so that's another thing from my viewpoint, when I say that, my conservative viewpoint. So what I mean by my conservative viewpoint is this. So, I come from, I've seen, like I will mention here, unfortunately, raised in a semi-traditional family, but the aspects of democratic views, was very revenant in the household. And so, I don't know when I saw the writing in between the wall of how the things weren't what they seem when it comes to stuff like that. So what do I mean by this? So I remember when, Clinton was in office, right? it was this whole thing where he was, being, pushed upon as, oh, he's going to be the new hope. And this whole ideology behind it of, it was really, seeing things and understanding from what I could understand, from a kid's point of view. It looks good on the surface, but towards the end, it was kind of strange to me because, it seems like he was just saying whatever he wanted to say in order to get votes. He didn't really mean it. And so that was really present a lot of times in a lot of these issues that were going on. And then I remember, with these riots that were going on, LA riots. I remember Anita Hill going on with Anita Hill and all these kind of things. So these things were like in my mind, remnant in my mind. Is this the way that it has to be? And so I remember seeing, I would watch the news, every so often, and then it was different because, like I said, in the 90s, it wasn't so unheard of for children to be, sitting down with the family to watch the evening news or so forth, or even to the most part of seeing the writing on the wall of how, current events were a real issue, a big thing for children. Nickelodeon had a show where it would talk about current events, right? And real social issues. And then that was the whole thing, too, that was relevant to me because, prevalent to me, saying how these ideologies were, laced in it even early on, even then, I mean, I don't know. It goes without saying because 70s, 60s, so forth, there's ideology with that. But, seeing it laced in, with hot topics, you could see where things were leaning. And so what really got me into paying attention to a lot of stuff and a lot of dispositions and how I felt and thought about the world was when I would see nonpartisan people speak, and then I would see Republican people speak, and I would see libertarians, or I would see, all these kind of things, right? Like it's very, clear upon the different dispositions, even from a child's point of view, of what's phony, what's real, what's this. And so that shaped a lot for me. And so I had the disposition, getting on to my teen years and so forth, it's better to have more of your feet on the ground than having all these frou-frou, she ideas, and that you don't really get the best results when, free for all, free health care for all, or being, politically correct. Because I remember when that show with Bill Maher, so forth, politically correct was going on. I only saw, the commercials for it. I wasn't really allowed to see it, but it's one of those things when you're a kid. Unfortunately, sometimes you do things you don't. You find ways to see things that you're not supposed to see, right? And so, seeing commercials for it and seeing clips and so forth, it was one of those shows where it seems like, he was, making fun of the whole idea of what does it mean to actually be politically correct, but at the same time, he was kind of playing to the cards of it, placating a little bit, when you see things, when you see it again as an adult, you know what I'm saying? And so, it's just, to me, when you are that the term anchor, from a nautical point of view, that means a completely different thing. But symbolically, the anchor, what does it do? It holds you down. It holds something down. So how can that be translated into, a routine, the way you see things, how you feel about things? That can really have, versus somebody has a sheltered viewpoint or a narrow viewpoint about life. That can really change the disposition of how you view yourself in the way that you see certain things. And that's what my takeaway was from this, from most of the things that I are interested in. It's showcasing the importance that it is to have this subtle and the subtleness of it, even though it's supposed to be symbolizing, exuding eroticism. But I see it not as something that is overtly sexual. I see it as something that is the painting as something that is intensely romantic, about the aspects of how beautiful love is between the embrace of being, submissive to your man, and to understanding that there is a bond with that, and there is a protection with that. And that's what I saw throughout this whole piece, even in the details of how they were positioned towards each other, is as if they were comforting each other, and all these things. And so I think it's quite interesting too to get on the other aspects of conservative personas, right? A conservative is supposed to be by the book, straight-laced, whatever, right? Now, there's a nuance to that. See, me personally, there's nothing wrong with wanting the appearance, being appropriate here. But this whole thing where, having, what's the best way I can describe this, being really anal, that can be, in a arena of somebody that has a lot of issues or psychological issues that needs to be, aware of, where that could be unhealthy. And so this whole thing where if you have a very narrow-minded, or you have a very, even though you say that you are tolerant of everything, if you only see things from a certain niche of a point, or you're sheltered and you don't understand these things, right? You don't understand that just because you're conservative doesn't mean that you don't have great appreciation for art, great appreciation for culture, great appreciation for fine dining, and for food or so forth. Great appreciation for other people that you don't agree with, that see things other than that you don't agree with. But the difference here is the attitude between it. Now, I think a really good example of this is tone, right? So when we get into language, tone means everything. It means something different. Now, tone can mean tonally how you hear things and how you speak. When you get into the breaking down of Asian dialects or other dialects, Farsi, Russian dialects, or so forth. How do you hear it? Like, how do you enunciate things to where you can understand it? But tone, in this sense, is what I'm referring to is the emotion behind the tone. Now, when you say something to somebody, it could come across very differently in the way that you say it, and how you, the word choice that you use, to where a lot of times things get polarized where they shouldn't be. Simply if you say, if you say, you sound offensive already. You say, I hear you, right? Well, you're already coming across as something, and abrasive, to where the other person kind of has no choice but to be matched, emotion for emotion, and that's how we get a lot of destruction, right? But when you can simply say, if you don't agree with what somebody is saying, you can simply say, "Oh, I hear you. Okay. Oh. Well, that's different. I don't really think that way," or something. That's a lot of nuance to that, and that's where I think a lot of things are right when we get into the aspects of having this conservative understanding about things. And I think that pretty much what it boils down to have it with that, which I want y'all to understand this, and the whole reason for me speaking and addressing to you and having you understand my viewpoints and seeing my viewpoints is that common sense and well-being will take you a long way and give you a lot of well-being, right? And then when you start to mess with these things with common sense and mess with these things with having developing and it being enlightened with understanding how enriching it is to be giving, to be understanding of others, really being understanding of others here, then you really have something to contribute greatly into the development of culture. And so with that said here, I'm going to wrap up by giving you some unknown facts about the kiss here. Well, did you know? Okay. So these are essentially 10 facts about it. Okay. So I'm going to just run it through real quick. So I'm going to run through and I'm going to talk about the last one and then work my way up to the first. So number 10, it says the conclusion of World War II. Toward the conclusion of World War II, the University of Vienna ceiling paintings were among a number of Klimt's artworks was destroyed by which is, I'll give my thoughts about that. German troops. So the kiss, however, remains on exhibit in Belvedere. So it's quite, now when we get into World War II, who are we talking about here? We're talking about the Germans. We're talking about Nazis. We're talking about Hitler, right? And it's quite interesting in the aspects of how, you say, this term is being thrown around a lot now. Oh, you're a Hitler. You're a this. Because you don't agree with me, right? When you don't understand this, see, that's why it's very important to understand what things mean and what things are and that things really have meaning, okay? So, and then, it's ironic because the people who truly were Nazis, they would revel in that because that's what they were all about. We got to break away from the stupidity that I see today with just saying using really overtly derogatory words to shut somebody down just because you're too much of you're too immature to have respect for how somebody sees things differently than you do, right? And so what I'm getting back to the point is, they would revel in that because that's what they were all about. They were all about using images to corrupt what's supposed to be something that's, culturally found or culturally pure. And this is another example of that. All right, so the kiss is a as they say, a menage of different schools of art. So the gold leaf harkens back to such Byzantine works as mosaics and church in at Saint Vital, and that makes a lot of sense because the Art Nouveau movement, you could see a lot of that where it looks like it would make it would be very suitable as a mosaic, and a mosaic in itself is a mixed media sort of arena to me, because going back to the earlier parts of when mosaics were very prevalent, when you get into Mesopotamia, you get into Mediterranean cultures, the glass that they use and to arrange figures and so forth with mosaics, it really looks like a mixed piece work. So that this makes a lot of sense what they're saying here, but they're saying it in a different sense here. So the contrasting patterns of two lovers cloak reflects the arts and the crafts movement of the era, and the overall Klimt imbued and the kiss with the elements of his signature Art Nouveau style. Alright, so one factor that distinguishes the kiss from the majority of the artist's work is the inclusion of a man and a woman together. So other paintings that feature both sexes include this Beethoven Frieze from 1901, and The Fulfillment of the Embrace from 1905, and The Death in Life from 1910. So the artist created the kiss. Hold on, my baby girl. Piper! Piper! Come here. I'm in the van. Okay, she's coming. All right, so, let's get back to this. So the artist created the kiss, his most iconic painting, in the aftermath of a dismissal failure. So during the first decade, of the 20th century, Klimt completed a series known as the Vienna Ceiling Paintings at the University of Vienna's Great Hall.
Mommy, I'm hungry.
Hold on. So, due in large part to the new figures, with the series, it established art community, and in itself, with that, to bring light of this, how. No, baby, hold on. Let me finish what I'm talking about. So that's another thing about the.
Mommy, I just did it with the handle.
Yeah, close the door. No, you don't need to be around while I'm talking about this. Go. Okay, so that's another thing that, being, this reminds me of that too, being quite honest about this aspect. So this is one of the tame ones and more conservative ones than in the pieces that he did, was more pornography in itself. And that's quite interesting, of how the disposition about being free-forming with your body and being very erotic was not really, sought over so not perceived so well when it comes to this era and the aspects of art and how time evolves and changes these viewpoints. So Klimt ultimately called upon the help of a wealthy patron to repay his commission of 300,000 crowns to Vienna's Ministry, which of Education, and took his paintings elsewhere. And it also is one of those things, know your audience, okay? Like, why are you trying to sell these kind of things, erotic things, to a ministry? Be respectful for that. That's another thing, too, All right, so The Kiss is the final painting of Klimt's gold period, during which he incorporated gold leaf into his work. All right, so the artist and the work are legal tender. So in 2003, the Australian Mint issued 14 gram or 100 euro gold coin showing Gustav Klimt's head on the flip side and the etching of the kiss. That's interesting. So the painting is oversized and measuring approximately 6 by 6 feet. Wow. So the scale price of 25 crowns is roughly 240,000 in contemporary U.S. currency. All right, so despite the public outcry it generated, the kiss sold before the kiss sold before the artist and had completely finished it. So the Bellevue Belvedere Museum of Vienna, Austria was the purchaser. All right, so number one. So the post-Victorian society of the early 1900s perceived the kiss as very pornographic, even though both figures are fully robed. Now, this is the whole thing about the aspects of the Victorian era. The Victorian era was all about the aspects of purity and being, I guess you can say, into the aspects of repressed. But see, it gotten to a point to where the aspects of purity got perverse by repression, where it shouldn't be, in certain aspects. But it was a time where, what I take from it, the good part about it, what I take from it, of knowing the aspects of how important it is to have dignity and hold yourself in a refined and manner, and how that resonates to the world and what the world thinks about that. So with this said, this reaches the end of the Harboring Light, right? And I would greatly like to know what you all think. Feel free to reach out to me, okay? The best way to do that is email. I prefer that because I can get to you immediately. On YouTube, of course, is great. Yes, baby. All right, so I'm coming. So tune in, turn up, and definitely take care out there. Okay, go ahead. Bye-bye for now.